What happens when the man you use as a shield turns out to be the most dangerous predator in the room? She thought she was just avoiding a humiliating run-in with her toxic ex at a high society New York gala. So she grabbed a handsome stranger and begged him for a single dance. She didn't know the man whose arms she stepped into was the ruthless head of the city's most feared underworld syndicate. By the time the music stopped, her life was no longer her own. The grand ballroom of the Pierre Hotel was a masterclass in suffocating opulence. Beneath the glittering light of crystal chandeliers, Manhattan's elite moved like sharks in a gilded tank. Baccarat crystal flutes chimed softly, filled with Dom Perignon, 2008, while a string quartet in the corner played a hauntingly slow rendition of a Vivaldi concerto. Chloe Bennett stood near a towering ice sculpture, feeling entirely out of place. As a junior event coordinator for one of the city's top firm, she was only there to ensure the charity gala ran smoothly. She was dressed in a borrowed emerald green Carolina Herrera gown that hugged her curves flawlessly, but beneath the silk, her stomach was tied in agonizing knots. Then she saw him, Nathan Prescott, her ex-fiancé. He strolled through the towering double doors of the ballroom, looking every bit the arrogant Morgan Stanley vice president he was. But it wasn't just his presence that made the air completely vanish from Chloe's lungs. Clinging to his arm was Savannah Croft, the billionaire shipping heiress Nathan had been sleeping with for the last 6 months of their relationship. Savannah looked radiant in a custom Tom Ford dress, laughing at something Nathan whispered in her ear. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced Chloe's chest. For months, she had painstakingly avoided the financial district, skipped mutual friends' parties, and changed her entire routine just to avoid this exact scenario. The humiliation of the breakup had nearly broken her. Now Nathan's gaze was sweeping the room. It was only a matter of seconds before he spotted her standing alone, blending into the catering staff, looking like the pathetic, discarded fiancé he believed her to be. She needed an escape. She needed a shield. Chloe spun around, her heels clicking desperately against the polished marble floor. Her eyes darted through the crowd of tuxedo-clad men, searching for an exit, but the crowd was too thick. That was when she crashed directly into a solid, unyielding chest. She gasped, stumbling backward, but a large, heavily ringed hand shot out, gripping her elbow to steady her. The grip was shockingly firm, almost bruising, and sent an immediate jolt of electricity up her arm. Chloe looked up, and the breath she had just managed to draw completely abandoned her. The man standing before her was breathtakingly lethal. He was tall, over 6'3", with broad shoulders encased in a flawless midnight black bespoke Brioni tuxedo that whispered of old money and deep secrets. His face looked as though it had been carved from marble by a sculptor who only understood angles and cruelty. High cheekbones, a sharp jawline dusted with dark stubble, and eyes as black and cold as obsidian. He didn't apologize for the collision. He merely looked down at her, his expression unreadable, a heavy gold signet ring gleaming under the chandelier light. Out of the corner of her eye, Chloe saw Nathan turning his head in her direction. Pure, unadulterated desperation took over. Without thinking, Chloe stepped directly into the imposing stranger's personal space. She placed her trembling hand on his lapel, feeling the hard, heated muscle beneath the expensive wool. "Please," she whispered, her voice trembling, her eyes wide and pleading as she looked up into his dark gaze. "Just dance with me. My ex is here, and I just can't let him see me alone." For a second that felt like a lifetime, the man did absolutely nothing. His cold, calculating eyes flicked from her terrified face over her shoulder, tracking the room until they inevitably landed on Nathan. Chloe felt the man's chest rise in a slow, measured breath. The faint, intoxicating scent of bergamot, expensive tobacco, and leather washed over her. A slow, dangerously amused smirk curled the corner of his lips. It wasn't a comforting smile. It was the smile of a wolf that had just been handed a lamb. "Your ex?" His voice was a deep, gravelly baritone that seemed to vibrate straight through her bones. It was a voice used to giving orders that people died trying to follow. "Please," Chloe breathed again, terrified he was going to push her away and expose her to Nathan's incoming mockery. Just one song. The man looked back down at her. The amusement in his dark eyes shifted into something heavy, possessive, and terrifyingly intense. "Careful, little bird," he murmured, his voice dropping to a hypnotic whisper. "You don't know whose cage you're flying into." Before she could process the warning, his large hand slid from her elbow to the small of her back. With a smooth, authoritative motion, he pulled her flush against his chest and stepped backward, sweeping her seamlessly onto the mahogany dance floor just as the orchestra transitioned into a sweeping waltz. The physical contact was overwhelming. Chloe had never been held like this before. His hand splayed across her lower back was a brand of heat, his fingers pressing into her spine with absolute authority. His other hand engulfed hers, his grip loose but unbreakable. As they began to move, Chloe realized he didn't just know how to dance. He dominated the floor, maneuvering her with a terrifying, fluid grace that forced everyone else to subtly step out of their way. "Relax," he commanded softly, feeling the rigid tension in her shoulders. "If you want him to believe you've moved on, you need to look like you actually desire the man holding you." Chloe swallowed hard, her heart hammering against her ribs. She forced herself to look up into his face. Up close, he was even more intimidating. There was a faint, jagged scar cutting through the edge of his left eyebrow, a violent imperfection on an otherwise flawless face. As they spun, the cuff of his jacket shifted, and she caught the briefest glint of a Patek Philippe Grand Complications watch, a timepiece worth more than her entire apartment building. "What's your name?" he asked, his dark eyes locking onto hers, stripping away all her defenses. "Chloe," she whispered. "Chloe." He tasted the name, his deep voice wrapping around the syllables. "Who are we hiding from, Chloe?" "The man by the champagne fountain, in the navy tuxedo. Nathan Prescott." The stranger didn't even turn his head, but Chloe felt a subtle shift in his posture. The air around him seemed to drop 10 degrees. "The investment banker, Morgan Stanley. He's been losing millions on leveraged buyouts in the tech sector." Chloe blinked in shock. How do you know that?" His smirk returned, sending a shiver down her spine. "I know everything about the men in this city who handle money, especially the incompetent ones." Before Chloe could ask what that meant, a voice sliced through the music like a rusted blade. Well, Chloe Bennett, I didn't think you could afford the entry fee for an event like this." Chloe froze, her blood turning to ice. She stopped moving, but the man holding her didn't let her go. He kept his arm firmly wrapped around her waist, anchoring her to his side as they both turned. Nathan stood there, an ugly, condescending sneer on his face. Savannah was draped over his arm, looking Chloe up and down with barely concealed pity. "Did you sneak in through the catering entrance?" Nathan asked, taking a sip of his champagne. "Or did you finally max out that pitiful little credit card of yours to rent that dress?" Chloe opened her mouth, a retort dying on her tongue, but before she could speak, the stranger beside her shifted. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't make a sudden movement. But the sheer, oppressive weight of his presence suddenly slammed down on Nathan. The stranger looked at Nathan with a gaze so utterly devoid of humanity, so terrifyingly blank, that Nathan's arrogant sneer faltered instantly. "Prescott," the stranger said softly. The word wasn't a greeting, it was a death sentence. Nathan's eyes finally snapped from Chloe to the man holding her. For a second, annoyance flared in Nathan's eyes, but as he actually looked at the stranger's face, the annoyance drained away, replaced by a sudden sickening pallor. Nathan's jaw went slack. The champagne flute in his hand trembled, spilling a few drops of the expensive vintage onto his polished shoes. Mr. Rossi," Nathan stammered, his voice suddenly an octave higher, completely stripped of its previous arrogance. I didn't realize you were in attendance tonight." Chloe felt a jolt of confusion. "Rossi?" The name sounded familiar, but she couldn't place it. The man, Rossi, stared at Nathan for a long, agonizing moment. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. People nearby began to instinctively back away, sensing the sudden drop in atmospheric pressure. You interrupted my dance, Prescott, Rossi said, his voice a smooth, deadly purr. I find interruptions highly disrespectful. Nathan swallowed loudly, beads of sweat breaking out on his forehead despite the air-conditioned ballroom. Savannah looked between the two men, sensing the danger but too foolish to understand it. I apologize, sir, Nathan choked out, actually taking a physical step backward. I didn't realize Chloe was associated with you. If I had known, you would have kept your mouth shut and your eyes averted, Rossi interrupted, his voice dropping to a whisper that carried over the music. I am aware of your recent failures with the Eris Tech buyout, Nathan. I am also aware that your firm is desperately looking for someone to take the fall. If you ever speak to Chloe with that tone again, if you ever even look in her direction in this city, I won't just ensure you lose your job. I will ensure you lose everything, and I mean everything. Do we have an understanding? Nathan looked as though he was going to vomit. He nodded frantically, not even bothering to look at Chloe. Yes, Mr. Rossi. Completely understood. We were just leaving. Without another word, Nathan grabbed Savannah by the arm, nearly dragging her away as he practically sprinted toward the ballroom exit. Chloe stood frozen, her mind racing, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She looked up at the man who still had his hand resting intimately on her waist. Who are you? She breathed, the realization dawning on her that she hadn't just used a wealthy businessman as a shield. She had used a weapon. Rossi looked down at her, his dark eyes softening just a fraction, though the danger radiating from him remained entirely intact. He reached up, his knuckles brushing against her cheek in a gesture that was terrifyingly tender. I'm the man you asked for a dance, Chloe, he murmured, and the music hasn't stopped. He pulled her back into the rhythm of the waltz, but Chloe was no longer hiding from her ex. She was trapped in the arms of something infinitely more dangerous, completely unaware that she had just permanently altered the trajectory of her life. The next morning felt like walking through a fog. Chloe sat at her cramped desk in the midtown offices of Lumiere Events, a half-empty cup of bitter coffee cooling beside her keyboard. She kept replaying the previous night in her head, the heat of his hand on her waist, the absolute terror in Nathan's eyes. The name. Rossi. She had tried Googling him on her phone in the cab ride home, but the results were strangely sanitized. There were articles about Damian Rossi, CEO of Rossi Holdings, a massive conglomerate dealing in real estate, shipping, and imports. He was described as a reclusive billionaire, a ruthless negotiator, and a phantom in the New York social scene. But there were no pictures, no personal details, just whispers on Reddit threads that were mysteriously deleted, muttering about old Sicilian bloodlines, underground casinos, and bodies buried deep beneath the foundations of luxury high-rises. Chloe! The shrill voice of her boss, Patricia, shattered her thoughts. Patricia, a high-strung woman in her 50s who survived entirely on nicotine and panic, burst out of her glass-walled office, clutching an iPad like it was a ticking bomb. In my office. Now! Patricia snapped, her face flushed red. Chloe stood up, her stomach twisting. Had she done something wrong at the gala? Did someone complain? She hurried into Patricia's office, closing the door behind her. Patricia didn't sit down. She paced behind her desk, running a hand through her perfectly sprayed hair. I don't know what you did last night at the Pierre, Patricia started, her voice trembling slightly. But as of 20 minutes ago, Lumiere Events no longer belongs to our parent company. Chloe blinked, completely lost. What? What do you mean? I mean, Patricia stopped and stared at her with wide, fearful eyes. A private holding firm just bought us out, completely. A hostile, immediate cash buyout at double our market valuation. The ink is already dry. Chloe felt the floor tilt beneath her. Who bought us? Patricia swallowed hard. Rossi Holdings. The name hit Chloe like a physical blow. She staggered back a half step, her hand catching the edge of a leather chair for support. And that's not all, Patricia continued, her voice dropping to an anxious whisper. They sent a courier with a mandate. They are hosting a private, exclusive gala in 3 weeks at their new headquarters in Tribeca. Money is no object, but there is a strict stipulation in the contract. Patricia pointed a shaking finger at Chloe. You are to be the lead coordinator. No one else. If you are not put in charge of the Rossi account, they will liquidate the company and fire everyone. Chloe couldn't breathe. The air conditioning in the office suddenly felt freezing. You don't know whose cage you're flying into, his voice echoed in her mind. A car's waiting downstairs, Patricia said, rushing over to hand Chloe her coat and briefcase. You have a preliminary meeting with the CEO right now. Chloe, listen to me. I don't know how you got his attention, but the Rossi family, they aren't just rich. They are dangerous. People who cross them disappear. Please, just give him whatever he wants, smile, and get out of there. 15 minutes later, Chloe found herself in the back of a blacked-out Maybach, gliding silently through the chaotic streets of Lower Manhattan. Her heart was beating so hard she felt lightheaded. The car pulled up to a towering, brutalist skyscraper in Tribeca. There were no corporate logos on the glass doors, only a sleek minimalist R etched into the stone facade. Two men in dark suits with distinct bulges beneath their jackets stood by the entrance. As Chloe approached, they seamlessly stepped aside, opening the heavy glass doors without a word. She was escorted into a private elevator that required retinal scanning to operate. The display blinked green, and the elevator shot upward with stomach-dropping speed. It bypassed every floor, stopping only when it reached the penthouse level. The doors slid open with a soft chime. Chloe stepped out into a sprawling, immaculate office. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a dizzying 360-degree view of the New York skyline. But Chloe barely noticed the view. Sitting behind a massive slab of black marble that served as a desk was Damian Rossi. He wasn't wearing a tuxedo today. He wore a crisp, dark slate dress shirt, the top two buttons undone, the sleeves rolled up to his forearms, revealing faded, intricate tattoos wrapping around heavy muscle. He was looking over a stack of documents, a lit cigar resting in a crystal ashtray, sending a thin ribbon of blue smoke into the air. As Chloe stepped onto the thick Persian rug, he slowly looked up. The cold predator's gaze locked onto her, but this time, there was a glimmer of undeniable possession in his dark eyes. He closed the file in front of him and leaned back in his leather chair, steepling his fingers. "You're late, Chloe," Damian said, his voice a low rumble that sent a tremor straight to her core. "You bought my company," she blurted out, unable to stop the words, her voice shaking with a mixture of terror and anger. "You bought my entire company just to make me plan a party?" Damian's lips curved into that same dangerous, wolfish smirk he had given her the night before. He stood up, towering over the desk, and began to slowly walk around it toward her. His movements were calculated, silent, like a panther stalking prey. "I didn't buy your company to have you plan a party, little bird," Damian said softly, stopping mere inches from her. He was so close she could feel the heat radiating from his body, could smell the intoxicating mix of bergamot and smoke. He reached out, his large hand gently cupping her jaw, forcing her to tilt her head back and look into his obsidian eyes. His thumb stroked her cheekbone, a gentle caress completely at odds with the violent world he commanded. "I bought your company," Damian whispered, leaning in until his lips were a breath away from hers. "Because I decided last night that you belong to me now, and I always own everything that is mine." Chloe wrenched herself backward, breaking the magnetic hold of Damian's gaze. Her heart battered against her ribcage like a trapped bird, but she forced her spine stiff, refusing to let him see the absolute terror pooling in her stomach. "I am not a piece of real estate, Mr. Rossi," Chloe said, her voice trembling only slightly. "You cannot buy me. You bought Lumiere Events. That gives you the right to my professional services as an event coordinator, not ownership of my life." Damian didn't flinch. He didn't look angry. Worse, he looked deeply entertained. He slowly lowered his hand, slipping it effortlessly into the pocket of his tailored slacks. "Professional services," he repeated, testing the words as if they were a foreign language. "Is that what you call what happened last night at the Pierre? You pressed yourself against my chest, looked up at me with those desperate, beautiful eyes, and begged me to protect you. I simply provided the service you requested. Now, I am collecting the invoice." "I asked for a dance," Chloe shot back, her cheeks burning with a mixture of humiliation and fury. "I didn't ask to be dragged into whatever this is." "You stepped onto the board, Chloe. You You don't get to dictate the rules of the game after the pieces are in motion. Damien turned his back to her, walking toward the floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the glittering sprawl of Manhattan. The gala is in 3 weeks. It will be held at my private estate in Southampton, not here in the city. You will handle the logistics, the catering, the aesthetics. You have an unlimited budget. My right-hand man, Leo, will provide you with a Black American Express and the guest list. And if I refuse? She challenged, her hands curling into fists at her sides. What if I just walk out that door and quit? Damien didn't turn around. His voice dropped, losing all traces of amusement. It became a flat, dead sound that made the hair on her arms stand up. Then I will ensure Patricia and every single one of your colleagues at Lumiere never works in this city again. I will freeze their assets. I will dismantle their lives piece by piece. And as for you, you would find that New York is a very small island when I have locked all the bridges. He finally looked over his shoulder, his dark eyes locking onto hers. Do the job, Miss Bennett. Be the professional you claim to be. Chloe swallowed the lump of bile rising in her throat. She had no choice. She was entirely outmatched, out-resourced, and outgunned. She nodded tightly, spun on her heel, and marched out of the penthouse. The reality of her situation didn't fully set in until she was sitting in her small Brooklyn apartment later that evening. Her phone buzzed relentlessly on the kitchen counter. It was an unknown number. She had ignored it 4 times, but when it rang for the 5th, she snatched it up, her nerves frayed to the breaking point. Hello? Chloe. Oh God, Chloe, please, you have to help me. It was Nathan. But he didn't sound like the arrogant Morgan Stanley executive from the night before. He sounded completely unhinged, his voice cracking with panic. Nathan, how did you get this number? They took everything, Chloe. He sobbed into the receiver. I walked into the office this morning and my keycard was dead. Security escorted me out. They didn't even let me pack my desk, my bank accounts, my checking, my savings, the offshore trusts. They're all frozen. Savannah dumped me. She said her father got a call from Rossi Holdings and threatened to sink their entire shipping fleet if she was seen with me. Chloe slumped against the kitchen counter, her blood running cold. Damien hadn't been making an empty threat. He had annihilated Nathan's entire existence in less than 12 hours, without even lifting a finger. Please, Chloe, Nathan begged, his voice reduced to a pathetic whine. I know I was a bastard. I know I hurt you, but please, talk to him. Tell Mr. Rossi I'm sorry. Tell him I'll leave the state. Just ask him to unfreeze my accounts. I can't, Nathan, Chloe whispered, feeling a sickening wave of dread wash over her. I don't have that kind of power over him. He bought your company for you. He destroyed my life for you, Nathan screamed. You owe me this. Chloe hung up the phone and blocked the number. Her hands were shaking uncontrollably. She walked over to her living room window and peered through the blinds. Parked across the street, idling beneath a broken streetlight, was a black Mercedes G-Wagon with tinted windows. It had been there since she got home. She wasn't just working for a billionaire. She was the captive of a monster. The next morning, Chloe arrived at the Rossi Holdings building to begin planning the gala. She was introduced to Leo, a strikingly handsome man with cold, calculating eyes and a tailored suit that barely concealed a shoulder holster. He handed her a thick leather folder. The guest list, Miss Bennett, Leo said, his tone perfectly polite but utterly void of warmth. 300 attendees. No press, no +1s unless explicitly pre-approved by Mr. Rossi. Chloe opened the folder. The names on the heavy parchment paper made her stomach drop. There were politicians, a prominent New York Supreme Court judge, a hedge fund manager currently under federal investigation, and names she recognized from late-night true crime documentaries, men who controlled ports, unions, and underground casinos. This wasn't a corporate anniversary party. It was a summit. Damien Rossi was bringing the most dangerous men in the country under one roof, and she was the one setting the table. Over the next 2 weeks, Chloe's entire existence was consumed by the Rossi Estate Gala. Her days were a blur of high-end vendors, floral arrangements flown in from the Netherlands, and tense meetings with Michelin-starred chefs. She tried to bury her fear in the work, treating the terrifying guest list as just another logistical hurdle. But Damien refused to let her forget who she belonged to. He inserted himself into the minutiae of her planning. He would summon her to his penthouse to review linen swatches, only to spend the entire hour staring at the pulse beating at the base of her throat. He sent a private tailor to her office to measure her for a custom gown she was mandated to wear at the event. Every time she tried to draw a professional boundary, he would step right over it, a dark predator amused by the fluttering of a moth. The breaking point arrived 10 days before the event. Chloe was required to accompany Damien to a private tasting at Le Bernardin. The world-renowned restaurant in Midtown had been entirely bought out for the afternoon. The dining room, usually bustling with New York's elite, was completely empty, save for a dozen of Damien's heavily armed guards standing silently at the perimeter. Chloe sat across from Damien at a corner table. She wore a tailored ivory blazer, her hands tightly clasped in her lap. Damien wore a charcoal Loro Piana suit, looking effortlessly lethal as he swirled a glass of vintage Bordeaux. "The Wagyu tartare with caviar," Chloe said, staring rigidly at her tablet, refusing to meet his eyes. "Chef Reipert suggests it for the past hors d'oeuvres, followed by the butter-poached lobster." "You haven't eaten anything, Chloe," Damien noted, completely ignoring her presentation. He leaned forward, the heavy scent of his cologne wrapping around her. "You're losing weight. The dress I commissioned for you won't fit if you keep starving yourself to spite me." "I'm not trying to spite you," she snapped, her professional facade cracking. "I'm trying to do the job you blackmailed me into doing so I can get my life back." Damien's eyes darkened. "Your life was pathetic before you crashed into me, Chloe. A junior planner fetching coffee, weeping over an incompetent banker who threw you away. I elevated you. You imprisoned me." Before Damien could respond, the heavy mahogany doors of the restaurant swung open with a violent crash. The sommelier, who had been waiting by the wine cellar, gasped and pressed himself against the wall. Damien's guards drew their weapons in unison, the deafening clack-clack of a dozen handguns chambering rounds echoing through the silent dining room. Chloe froze, her breath catching in her throat. Strolling into the restaurant, flanked by 4 men who looked like they were carved out of granite, was a man in his late 50s. He wore a flashy maroon suit, his silver hair slicked back, a thick gold chain resting against his collarless black shirt. His face was a map of old scars, and his eyes were a pale, icy blue. Damien didn't even blink. He raised a single hand, his fingers twitching slightly. His guards instantly lowered their weapons, though they didn't holster them. "Dimitri," Damien said, his voice dropping into a register so cold it could shatter glass. "You are interrupting my lunch. That is a very dangerous mistake." Dmitry Volkov, the undisputed head of the Russian Bratva in Brooklyn, offered a smile that didn't reach his dead eyes. He walked over to their table, pulling out a chair and sitting down uninvited. "I apologize for the intrusion, Damien," Dmitri said, his thick Russian accent dripping with fake pleasantry. "But you have been ignoring my calls regarding the shipping containers at the Red Hook terminal. My men are getting restless. We had an arrangement." "The arrangement was altered when your men decided to skim 10% of the weaponry off the top before turning it over to my distributors," Damien replied, taking a slow sip of his wine. "The shipment is mine now. Consider it a tax for your incompetence. Now get out of my sight before I decide to tax your life." The temperature in the room plummeted. Chloe sat perfectly still, terrified that making a single sound would draw their attention. She was sitting in the middle of a Mafia war council over a plate of untouched lobster. Dimitri's fake smile vanished. He leaned forward, his heavy hands resting on the crisp white tablecloth. "You're getting arrogant, Rossi. You think because you wear expensive suits and buy up legitimate companies that you're untouchable, but every man has a weakness." Slowly, deliberately, Dimitri turned his pale, icy eyes toward Chloe. Chloe felt a primal jolt of terror. Dimitri looked at her not as a person, but as leverage. A piece of meat to be used in a trap. "And who is this beautiful creature?" Dimitri purred, reaching a scarred hand across the table toward her. "Your new pet? She looks very fragile. It would be a terrible tragedy if something were to happen to such a pretty face on her way home." What happened next was so fast, Chloe's brain could barely process it. Damien didn't shout. He didn't issue a warning. In a blur of motion, Damien's hand shot across the table. He grabbed the heavy silver steak knife resting next to his plate and drove it violently downward. The blade punched straight through the back of Dimitri's hand, pinning it to the solid oak table beneath the white linen. Dimitri let out a blood-curdling scream, his body convulsing in shock. His guards immediately reached for their guns, but before they could even clear their holsters, Damien's men had them completely surrounded, gun barrels pressed flush against the backs of the Russians' heads. Chloe screamed, pushing her chair back so violently it tipped over, crashing onto the marble floor. Blood was rapidly pooling on the pristine white tablecloth, soaking into the linen. Damien didn't rise from his seat. He kept his hand firmly on the hilt of the knife, leaning in close to Dimitri's agonizing, sweating face. "Look at me, Dimitri," Damien whispered, a monstrous, terrifying darkness radiating from his very soul. Dimitri gasped, choking on his own pain, his eyes rolling wildly before locking onto Damien. "You do not speak to her," Damien said, his voice entirely devoid of humanity. "You do not look at her. You do not even breathe the same air as her. If one of your men so much as steps onto the same city block as this woman, I will not just kill you. I will flay you alive, butcher your entire syndicate, and burn your operations to the ground with your family inside. Do you understand me?" Dimitri, pale and shivering in agony, managed a frantic, trembling nod. Damien yanked the knife out of the table. Dimitri collapsed backward, clutching his bleeding hand, groaning in agony. "You have 24 hours to leave New York," Damien commanded, wiping the bloody blade on a linen napkin before tossing it onto the table. "If I see your face in this city again, I will put a bullet between your eyes myself. Get him out of here." Dimitri's men grabbed their boss, hauling him to his feet and dragging him out of the restaurant, leaving a trail of dark blood on the marble floor. The heavy doors swung shut. Silence descended on the dining room, broken only by the sound of Chloe's ragged, hyperventilating breaths. Damien turned to her. The monster vanished, replaced instantly by a calm, chilling composure. He stood up, walked over to where she was huddled against the wall, and offered her his hand. "Come, little bird," he said softly, as if he hadn't just maimed a man in front of her. "Lunch is over. We have a gala to plan." Chloe didn't go back to the office. The moment Damien's driver dropped her off at her brownstone in Brooklyn, she ran up the stairs, locked her door, and threw up in the kitchen sink. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the silver blade punching through flesh, heard the sickening crunch of bone, saw the dead, soulless void in Damien's eyes. Every man has a weakness. Dimitri's words echoed in her skull like a funeral bell. She wasn't just a captive event planner anymore. Dimitri had seen Damien's reaction. He had seen the possessive, violent rage Damien unleashed to protect her. In the eyes of the Russian mafia, Chloe was no longer a bystander. She was the chink in the armor of the most powerful boss in New York. She was a target. Panic, cold, and absolute seized her. She couldn't stay here. Damien's protection meant nothing if it meant living in a war zone. She had to run. Chloe sprinted to her bedroom, dragging a dusty duffel bag from beneath her bed. She began throwing things into it wildly: jeans, sweaters, her passport, whatever cash she had hidden in her sock drawer. She didn't know where she was going. Maybe Canada. Maybe somewhere deep in the Midwest. She just had to get out of the city before Volkov decided to retaliate, or before Damien decided to lock her in a vault forever. She zipped the bag shut, her chest heaving. She grabbed her coat and turned toward the bedroom door. Crack! The sound of her front door being kicked off its hinges echoed through the small apartment, followed by the heavy thud of boots on the hardwood floor. Chloe froze, her blood turning to ice. "Spread out. Find the girl. Do not shoot her in the face. The boss wants him to recognize her when we send the pieces back," a thick, heavily accented voice commanded from the living room. Volkov's men. They hadn't left the city. They had come straight for her. Tears of pure terror spilled down Chloe's cheeks. She looked around her tiny bedroom. There was no fire escape, no second door. She was trapped on the third floor. She backed into her closet, pulling the slatted doors shut, pressing herself against the back wall, praying to a god she hadn't spoken to in years. She covered her mouth with both hands, trying to muffle the sound of her own hyperventilation. Heavy footsteps approached her bedroom. The door was shoved open. "Check the bathroom," a voice barked. Clear! Another yelled. Shadows moved past the slats of the closet door. Chloe squeezed her eyes shut. She was going to die. Because of a stupid breakup. Because she asked the wrong man to dance. Suddenly, the air in the apartment changed. The heavy footsteps of the Russians stopped. There was a soft, almost imperceptible whip, followed by the wet, sickening sound of a body hitting the floor right outside her bedroom door. What the? One of the Russians started to yell. Thwip, thwip, thwip. The sounds of silenced gunfire ripped through the apartment. It was brutally efficient. No shouting, no grandstandings. Just the terrifying mechanical sound of suppressed weapons and bodies dropping like dead weight. Silence fell over the apartment. A silence so heavy it felt suffocating. Chloe remained pressed against the back of the closet, entirely paralyzed by fear. Had the police arrived? Had a rival gang hit the Russians? Footsteps approached the bedroom again. These were different, measured, deliberate, authoritative. The closet doors were violently yanked open. Chloe screamed, curling into a tight ball, waiting for the bullet. Chloe, open your eyes. The voice was a deep, gravelly rumble. Chloe gasped, slowly opening her eyes. Standing in the doorway of the closet was Damien. He was breathing heavily, a customized Glock 19 resting loosely in his right hand. His bespoke suit was ruined, splattered with dark, crimson droplets. His face was a mask of pure, unadulterated, lethal intent. But when his eyes found her huddled on the floor, the violent storm in them broke, replaced by a ferocious, terrifying relief. He dropped the gun onto the floor and dropped to his knees, reaching into the closet. "Oh, don't touch me!" Chloe sobbed, trying to push herself further into the drywall. "Don't touch me, please!" Damien ignored her protests. He reached out, his large hands gripping her shoulders, hauling her out of the dark closet and pulling her flush against his chest. He buried his face in her hair, his arms wrapping around her in an iron vise, crushing her against him. "I've got you," he murmured, his voice tight, the adrenaline still coursing through his veins. "You're safe. I've got you." Chloe squeezed her eyes shut, sobbing hysterically into his blood-stained chest. She was surrounded by the corpses of the men who had come to kill her, held tightly in the arms of the monster who had brought this violence to her door. They came for me," she choked out. "I know," Damien whispered, kissing the top of her head, his grip tightening protectively. Volkov made a fatal miscalculation. He thought he could strike at what is mine. He's already dead. Leo is handling him as we speak. Damien stood up, pulling Chloe to her feet with him. She stumbled, her legs feeling like water. He didn't let her fall. He swept her up into his arms, carrying her bridal style out of the bedroom. As he carried her through the living room, Chloe kept her face buried in his neck, terrified to look at the carnage. The metallic scent of blood was overpowering. Where are we going?" she asked weakly as he carried her down the stairs and out into the cool night air, where a fleet of black SUVs was waiting, engines idling, armed men securing the perimeter. Damien looked down at her, his expression resolute and uncompromising. The illusion of her freedom, the facade of a professional relationship, was entirely gone. "Home," Damien said, his voice leaving absolutely no room for negotiation. "You are never returning to this apartment. You are never leaving my sight again. The cage is locked, Chloe, and I have swallowed the key." He placed her gently into the back of the armored Maybach, sliding in beside her. As the heavy doors slammed shut, sealing her in the dark, silent interior with the most dangerous man in New York, Chloe realized the terrifying truth. She had survived the night, but her life as she knew it was over. The Mafia Boss had claimed her, and in his violent, bloody world, what Damien Rossi claimed, he kept forever. The Southampton estate was a sprawling, modern fortress, masquerading as an architectural masterpiece. Nestled on 40 acres of private, jagged coastline overlooking the churning gray waters of the Atlantic, the property was a terrifying blend of luxury and militarized security. High walls constructed of sheer obsidian stone bordered the grounds, laced with invisible laser tripwires and guarded by men who patrolled with Belgian Malinois attack dogs. Inside, the mansion was a cold, echoing expanse of Venetian plaster, floor-to-ceiling bulletproof glass, and imported Italian marble. For 4 days, Chloe had not stepped foot outside the master suite. She stood by the massive window, wrapped in a plush cashmere robe, watching the relentless waves crash against the cliffs below. Her old life felt like a fever dream. Her apartment in Brooklyn was a crime scene. Her phone had been destroyed by Leo. She was completely, utterly isolated, entirely dependent on the man who had dragged her into the underworld. The heavy mahogany door clicked open. Damien stepped into the room. He had discarded his usual suit jacket, wearing only a tailored Tom Ford dress shirt tucked into dark trousers, a holster still strapped across his broad chest. The sheer, overwhelming gravity of his presence instantly suffocated the air in the room. He walked over to a crystal decanter on a silver tray and poured 2 fingers of Macallan 25. "You haven't eaten the breakfast the chef brought up," Damien noted, his deep voice slicing through the silence. He didn't look at her, his attention seemingly fixed on the amber liquid in his glass. "I'm not hungry," Chloe replied, her voice hoarse. "I feel like a prisoner." Damien took a slow sip, finally turning those fathomless obsidian eyes toward her. You are not a prisoner, Chloe. You are protected. There is a very distinct difference." "Is there?" she challenged, turning away from the window to face him. Her fear had slowly metamorphosed into a desperate, hollow kind of defiance. "I can't leave this room. I have guards stationed outside my door. You dictate what I wear, when I eat, and who I speak to. Volkov's men came to kill me because of you." Damien set the glass down with a sharp clink. In 3 long strides, he crossed the room, stopping just inches from her. Chloe instinctively took a step back, her back hitting the cold glass of the window. He didn't touch her, but he trapped her there, caging her in with his body. "Volkov came for you because he recognized that you are the only thing in this world I care about," Damien said, his voice dropping into a lethal, vibrating whisper. "He thought he could use you to break me. I sent his head back to his lieutenants in a cedar box this morning. The Bratva is currently tearing itself apart in a civil war. No one will ever come for you again." Chloe's breath hitched. "The only thing in this world I care about." The confession was terrifying, a heavy chain wrapping around her throat. "The gala is in 3 days," Damien continued, reaching out to gently brush a stray lock of hair behind her ear. The touch was agonizingly tender for a man with so much blood on his hands. "The vendors are arriving downstairs to finalize the floral arrangements and the lighting for the ballroom. I need you to do your job, Chloe. Show these men that the woman standing beside me is not a weak, trembling captive, but a queen who cannot be broken." He stepped back, breaking the suffocating tension, and walked out of the room. An hour later, Chloe descended the sweeping glass staircase, escorted by 2 silent guards. The grand foyer had been transformed into a staging ground. Caterers from Per Se were arguing with logistics coordinators, while technicians rigged massive crystal chandeliers with localized LED systems. Chloe threw herself into the work, desperate for the distraction. She was reviewing the shipment manifests for the White Orchids when a young man in a gray uniform approached her, carrying a clipboard. "Miss Bennett?" he asked, keeping his voice low. "Yes?" Chloe replied, looking up from her iPad. The man glanced nervously at the 2 guards standing 20 feet away. He leaned in, pretending to point at a line on the clipboard. "I need you to sign for the floral delivery, ma'am, and I need you to listen to me very carefully without reacting." Chloe froze, her heart kicking into a frantic rhythm. "My name is Special Agent Thomas Reed, FBI Organized Crime Division," the man whispered, his lips barely moving. "We don't have much time. We know what Rossi did to Volkov. We know you are being held here against your will." Chloe stared at the clipboard, her mind spinning. "The FBI? Here? Inside the fortress?" "We have an inside source," Reed continued, tapping a pen against the paper. "Nathan Prescott flipped. He came to us when Rossi destroyed his finances. He gave us the guest list for the gala. It's the biggest gathering of syndicate bosses in a decade. We are raiding this compound on the night of the event." Chloe felt the blood drain from her face. "Raid? We are going to take Rossi down, Chloe, but we need your help. Underneath this clipboard is a cloned keycard that will get you through the kitchen service exit and a burner phone. On the night of the gala, at exactly 11 p.m., You need to go to the service exit. We will have a tactical team waiting to extract you before the shooting starts." He slipped a small plastic card and a tiny matte black phone into her hand, hiding the exchange flawlessly beneath the clipboard. "If you stay by his side, you will be indicted under the RICO Act as a co-conspirator, or you will catch a bullet in the crossfire," Agent Reed warned softly. "Take the out, Chloe. Save yourself." He gave her a polite nod, turned on his heel, and walked away, blending seamlessly back into the crowd of vendors. Chloe stood completely paralyzed, the cold plastic of the key card burning a hole against her palm. She looked across the expansive foyer. On the second-floor balcony, standing in the shadows, was Damien. He was watching her. He always was. The night of the gala descended upon Southampton like a velvet shroud. The Rossi estate was unrecognizable, transformed into a dark, glittering wonderland of absolute opulence and quiet menace. Black Maybachs, armored Rolls-Royces, and tinted Bentley Bentegas snaked up the sweeping driveway, depositing the most dangerous men and women on the eastern seaboard. Chloe stood in front of the gilded mirror in the master suite, staring at a stranger. Damien's personal tailor had outdone himself. The dress was a custom Oscar de la Renta gown, spun from midnight blue silk that clung to her curves like liquid shadow. It featured a plunging neckline and a daring slit up the thigh, projecting a dangerous, breathless elegance. Around her neck sat a platinum Cartier necklace, dripping with rare, conflict-free sapphires that felt as heavy as a collar. Her hair was swept over one shoulder in dark, cascading waves. Her lips painted a deep bruised crimson. She looked like money. She looked like power. She looked like a mafia boss's wife. The burner phone was strapped tightly to her thigh beneath the silk, held in place by a lace garter. The cloned keycard was tucked into her silver clutch. It was 9:30 p.m. She had exactly 90 minutes to make her escape. The bedroom door opened. Damien stepped in, wearing a bespoke three-piece charcoal suit, a diamond tie pin catching the light. He stopped in his tracks when he saw her, his dark eyes sweeping over her body with a possessive, consuming hunger that made Chloe's breath hitch in her throat. He walked slowly toward her, stopping just behind her. He looked at their reflection in the mirror, his large, warm hands settling heavily on her bare shoulders. "You are breathtaking," he murmured, his breath brushing against her neck. "A masterpiece forged in the dark." "They're waiting for you downstairs, Damien," Chloe said, her voice barely above a whisper, terrified he could hear her racing heartbeat. "Let them wait," he replied, pressing a soft, lingering kiss to the curve of her shoulder. "They need to understand that my time belongs entirely to you. Are you ready to face the wolves, little bird?" "As long as the biggest wolf is standing beside me," she replied, the words slipping out before she could stop them. Damien's eyes flashed in the mirror. A fierce, predatory satisfaction curved his lips. "Always, Chloe." He offered her his arm, and together they descended the grand staircase. The ballroom was a masterpiece of Chloe's own design. Thousands of white orchids cascaded from the ceiling, illuminated by dim, warm amber lighting. A string quartet played a haunting melody over the quiet hum of conversations. But the air was thick with tension. Everywhere Chloe looked, she saw predators. There were politicians laughing with cartel lawyers, corrupt union bosses clinking baccarat crystal flutes with Wall Street hedge fund managers. As Damien and Chloe stepped onto the floor, the room fell silent. Every eye turned to them. Men quickly bowed their heads. Women lowered their gazes. Damien moved through the crowd with the effortless, terrifying grace of a king surveying his conquered lands, keeping Chloe tucked firmly against his side. He introduced her not as his event planner, but simply as Chloe. The omission of a title spoke volumes. In their world, she didn't need one. She was his. That was enough to make the most lethal men in the room treat her with breathless reverence. The hours ticked by in a blur of champagne, hushed conversations in Italian and Russian, and the suffocating weight of Damien's constant presence. At 10:45 p.m., Damien was cornered by Senator Hayes and a prominent shipping magnate to discuss a zoning issue at the Brooklyn Navy Yard. It was the first time all night Damien had let go of her hand. I need to use the powder room, Chloe murmured to Leo, who had silently materialized a few feet away the moment Damien let her go. Leo nodded curtly, gesturing for a female guard in an evening gown to follow her. Chloe walked quickly down the marble hallway, her heart hammering against her ribs. She slipped into the luxurious restroom, the guard taking a position outside the door. Chloe locked herself in a stall, hiked up her dress, and pulled the burner phone from her garter. 10:52 p.m. She had to move. She bypassed the main sinks, pushing open a small, concealed door meant for the cleaning staff that connected to the mansion's labyrinth of service corridors. She kicked off her silver heels, carrying them in her hand as she ran silently down the dimly lit hallway. The silk of her dress rustled against her legs, sounding deafening in the quiet corridor. She turned a corner, heading straight for the kitchen service exit. Suddenly, a figure stepped out from the shadows blocking her path. Chloe gasped, dropping her shoes, her hand flying to her mouth. It was Nathan. He looked terrible. His tuxedo was ill-fitting, his face pale and covered in a sheen of terrified sweat, dark circles bruised beneath his eyes. "Chloe," he breathed, his voice cracking. "Thank God. Reed said you'd be coming this way." "Nathan, what are you doing inside? You're supposed to be with the FBI," Chloe whispered frantically, looking over her shoulder. "They sneaked me in with the catering crew to plant the final audio bugs," Nathan said, grabbing her arm with a desperate, clammy grip. "We have to go. Now. The tactical teams are breaching the perimeter in exactly 4 minutes. They're going to shoot everything that moves. Come on." He pulled her toward the metal service doors at the end of the hall. Chloe stumbled, her bare feet slipping on the polished concrete. She looked at the man who had broken her heart, the man who had discarded her for money and status, now shivering like a coward, willing to burn down an empire just to save his own skin. And then she thought of Damien. Damien, who had shielded her. Damien, who had gone to war with the Russian Bratva just because their boss had looked at her the wrong way. Damien, who looked at her like she was the only light in his dark, violent universe. If she walked through those doors, she was signing his death warrant. "Stop," Chloe said, digging her heels in. "Oh, what are you doing?" Nathan hissed, yanking her arm harder. "Are you insane? He's a monster, Chloe. He ruins people. He ruined me." "You ruined yourself, Nathan," she said coldly, a strange, profound calm suddenly washing over her. She ripped her arm out of his grasp. "And he didn't ruin me. He rebuilt me." How touching. The voice echoed down the corridor, dripping with a terrifying, absolute malice. Nathan froze, his eyes widening in sheer primal horror. At the other end of the hallway stood Damien. He had a suppressed Heckler & Koch USP tactical pistol in his right hand. Flanking him were Leo and 4 heavily armed enforcers. Damien didn't look angry. He looked like the devil incarnate. "Mr. Rossi, Nathan stammered, backing away, putting his hands up in the air. "Did you honestly believe, Nathan, that a rat could crawl into the viper's nest without being noticed?" Damien's voice was a low, vibrating hum that made the concrete floor seem to shake. He slowly walked forward, closing the distance. "I knew about the wire. I knew about Agent Reed. I knew about the raid before the DOJ even drafted the warrant." Chloe stared at Damien in shock. "You knew?" Damien briefly shifted his gaze to her, the darkness in his eyes softening for a microsecond. "I own the head of the organized crime division in New York, Chloe. Agent Reed is a rogue idealist. He thought he could bypass his superiors and use a pathetic, desperate banker to take me down." "Please," Nathan sobbed, falling to his knees. "Please, don't kill me. I'll tell them the wire malfunctioned. I'll take it back. Please, Chloe, beg him. Tell him I'm sorry." Chloe looked down at the man she had once thought she would marry. He was pathetic, a hollow, greedy coward. Then she looked at Damien, the man who had carved a bloody path through the city just to keep her safe, the monster who worshipped her. Damien stopped right in front of them. He didn't look at Nathan. He looked exclusively at Chloe, extending his left hand toward her. "The tactical teams outside have already been ordered to stand down by the director of the FBI," Damien said calmly. "Agent Reed is currently being arrested for unauthorized operations and treason. The board is clear." He looked into Chloe's eyes, offering her a choice that would define the rest of her existence. "You ran, Chloe. You tried to leave me," Damien whispered, the hurt in his voice barely perceptible, masked by absolute power. "But you stopped. Before he dragged you out, you stopped." "Why?" Chloe looked at the open service doors, the cool night air blowing in. Freedom was right there, a clean slate, a normal life. But a normal life meant settling for men like Nathan. It meant being weak. It meant being a pawn in everyone else's game. Chloe looked back at Damien. She saw the blood on his hands, the violence in his soul, and the unconditional, terrifying devotion in his eyes. She took a breath, lifted her chin, and placed her hand firmly into Damien's. "Because," Chloe said, her voice steady and ringing clear in the silent corridor, "I realized I don't want to hide from the monsters anymore. I want to rule them." Damien's eyes flared with a dark, triumphant fire. His grip tightened around her fingers, sealing the blood pact between them. Without breaking eye contact with Chloe, Damien raised the suppressed pistol and pointed it down at Nathan. "Stwip!" Nathan collapsed onto the concrete, completely silent. Damien lowered the gun, wrapping his arms securely around Chloe's waist, pulling her flush against his side. He kissed her deeply and fiercely, tasting of expensive whiskey, an absolute victory. "Leo," Damien commanded, breaking the kiss but keeping Chloe held tightly against him. "Clean up the garbage and lock the doors." "Yes, boss," Leo replied smoothly. Damien turned, leading Chloe back down the corridor, away from the cold night air and back into the glittering, suffocating warmth of the ballroom. She walked beside him, her head held high, the Cartier diamonds sparkling against her throat like a blood-stained crown. She had asked a stranger for a dance to escape her past, and in doing so, she had danced entirely out of the light. The cage was locked, the key was destroyed, and for the first time in her life, Chloe had absolutely no desire to be free. What a descent into darkness! Chloe thought she was just avoiding a toxic ex, but she ended up becoming the queen of New York's most dangerous underworld empire. Sometimes, the only way to survive the monsters is to rule by their side. Do you think Chloe made the right choice by choosing Damien and the darkness, or should she have kept running? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you love this intense mafia romance and want more thrilling stories full of dangerous men and dark twists, hit that like button, share this video with your friends, and don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a new story.